It was a busy evening at one of the city's most upscale restaurants. The staff, dressed impeccably, catered to their well-heeled guests, making sure every detail was flawless. That's when he walked in, a well-dressed black man, calm but confident. As he approached the hostess stand, the mood shifted. Eyes turned, whispers began, and the woman behind the desk stiffened. Her polite smile faded into something colder. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked," she said firmly, though the dining room had empty tables. He didn't argue. Instead, he simply asked to speak to the manager. That only seemed to worsen the situation. The whispers grew louder, and the staff exchanged knowing looks, silently urging him to leave. What no one realized, however, was that this wasn't just any man. The person they were turning away happened to be one of the most renowned chefs in the world, and he wasn't leaving quietly. The manager arrived moments later, his expression impatient and dismissive. He glanced at the man and then at the hostess, who quickly explained, "He doesn't have a reservation." The man stayed calm, his voice steady. "I understand, but I was hoping you'd reconsider. I've traveled a long way and heard great things about your restaurant." The manager barely concealed his irritation. "We have policies in place. If you don't have a booking, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do." His tone carried a finality that left little room for negotiation. Still, the man didn't flinch. Instead, he offered a small smile. "You're sure about that? I'd hate to think your policies are more about me than your reservations." The staff's murmurs grew louder as the tension in the air thickened. Who was this man? Why didn't he leave? What no one in the restaurant realized was that their actions were about to have lasting consequences. The manager gave a curt nod to the hostess, signaling her to move on. He turned back to the man, this time with a forced smile. "Look, sir, we simply don't have room tonight. Perhaps you can try again another time." The man's gaze held steady, but he didn't argue. Instead, he glanced around the room, taking in the half-empty tables, and the staff who had stopped pretending not to watch. A couple sitting nearby whispered to each other, their curiosity growing. "Do you think he's someone important?" one of them asked. Others began to wonder the same. There was something about his calm demeanor, something that didn't quite fit with the picture of an ordinary diner. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the head chef was barking orders, unaware of what was unfolding outside. The man's eyes lingered on the swinging kitchen doors for a moment before turning back to the manager. "I see," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "Thank you for your time." Then just as he turned to leave, a familiar face appeared in the dining room. One of the servers froze, recognition dawning in her eyes. She whispered to a colleague, "That's him. I seen him on TV." The room buzzed with quiet confusion, the tension thickening. But the man kept walking, leaving behind a mystery that no one in the restaurant could ignore. The man paused just before reaching the door, turning back slightly as murmurs continued to ripple through the restaurant. The server who recognized him hesitated, then hurried into the kitchen, her face pale with urgency. "Chef, you won't believe who's out there," she whispered to the head chef, who barely looked up. "Not now." "We've got orders to fill," he snapped, chopping furiously at a block of herbs. "But it's asterisk him, asterisk," she insisted. "The one who's been on all those shows, the one with Michelin stars. He's out there." They're turning him away. That stopped the chef mid-motion. Slowly, he straightened, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "Are you sure?" Out in the dining room, the tension was at its peak. The manager, now uneasy, began to notice the stares and whispers growing louder. The man simply stood there, his calmness unshaken, his silence more powerful than any argument he could have made. The swinging kitchen doors burst open, and the head chef emerged, scanning the room. His eyes locked on the man, and his expression shifted from skepticism to shock. The dining room grew quieter as the realization spread. Who was this man that had stopped the chef in his tracks? The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The head chef approached cautiously, his steps deliberate as the dining room buzzed with quiet anticipation. The man turned to face him, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. The manager, still oblivious, quickly stepped in. "Chef, don't worry about this. He doesn't have a reservation, and we're handling it." But the head chef raised a hand, silencing him without a word. His focus was entirely on the man standing before him. "Is it really you?" the chef asked, his voice low but filled with awe. The room seemed to hang on his every word. The man offered a small, knowing smile but didn't respond. That's when the chef's tone shifted, laced with disbelief. You trained in Paris, didn't you? I've read your books, watched your interviews." The manager's confidence began to crumble as the realization dawned. The staff exchanged stunned glances, and the servers whispered frantically to one another. Meanwhile, the man finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "I was just passing through. I thought I'd see what your kitchen had to offer, but it seems my presence wasn't welcome." The head chef's face turned pale, and his grip tightened on the kitchen towel draped over his shoulder. "Wait," he said hurriedly, stepping closer. "If you leave now, it'll be the biggest mistake this place ever makes." But before anyone could respond, another figure entered the scene, a woman dressed in an elegant business suit. She strode in with authority, her eyes scanning the room before landing on the man. "Mr. Carter," she said firmly, "I didn't expect to find you here." The name hit like a lightning bolt. Mr. Carter, the culinary genius, the chef whose name carried weight across the globe. Gasps echoed as the room collectively realized the magnitude of their mistake. The tension reached a breaking point, but the man's calm demeanor never wavered. He simply glanced at the woman and said, apparently, neither did they. The dining room fell silent as the realization sank in. The head chef stood frozen, his confidence shattered. The manager stammered, trying to salvage the situation. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know. Please let us seat you immediately." But the man shook his head, his calm exterior finally breaking into something more serious. "It's not about the table," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the room. "It's about how you treat people when you think they don't matter." The businesswoman stepped forward, addressing the stunned staff. "Do you have any idea what kind of opportunity you almost threw away? Mr. Carter doesn't just visit restaurants, he transforms them. His endorsement could have taken you to heights you can't even imagine." She turned to Mr. Carter, her tone softening. "What would you like to do?" For a moment, he looked around the room, taking in the faces of those who had judged him. Then he smiled faintly. "I'd like to see the kitchen," he said. The head chef blinked in surprise, but quickly nodded, leading him through the swinging doors. The kitchen was pristine, bustling with activity, but the tension was palpable. Mr. Carter moved with quiet authority, inspecting dishes and asking thoughtful questions. To everyone's surprise, he picked up a knife and began demonstrating techniques, elevating their work with ease. The staff watched in awe, their earlier assumptions now replaced with admiration. Just as things seemed to settle, Mr. Carter turned to the head chef. "You've got talent," he said, "but your team's mindset will hold you back. A great kitchen starts with respect, not just for food, but for everyone who walks through those doors." With that, he walked out, leaving the restaurant in stunned silence. The manager scrambled to apologize, but the damage was done. The next day, the story of what had happened went viral, not because Mr. Carter had shamed them, but because he chose to teach them a lesson in humility and grace. And the final twist. Despite everything, he sent an anonymous review praising the kitchen's potential, giving them one last chance to rise above their mistakes. Word spread quickly about what had happened that night. Customers began flooding the restaurant, curious to experience the food Mr. Carter had quietly praised. The staff, humbled by the encounter, worked harder than ever, striving to live up to the unexpected second chance they'd been given. The head chef made changes, focusing not just on the menu, but on creating a culture of respect and teamwork in the kitchen. For Mr. Carter, it was never about revenge or humiliation. He believed in the power of food to bring people together, and in the lessons that moments of discomfort could teach. While he continued his journey, the restaurant he left behind transformed into a place known not just for its food, but for the way it welcomed everyone who walked through its doors. In the end, the story wasn't just about a missed opportunity. It was a reminder of the value of humility, kindness, and second chances.